Welcome. My name is John Brooker, and it is my great pleasure to be your host for this segment of our series, Discovering the Principles of Life, the Principles of Creation, Part 2. In the previous segment, we spoke about the nature of God and the structure and purpose of God's creation. We learned that God is an internal being of heart, and that He is the source of the energy of the universe. We learn that God is a being of masculinity as well as femininity, and that all things exist and grow through the relationships of giving and receiving between their dual masculine and feminine parts. And we learn that the most essential desire of God's heart, what motivated God to create, was to have an object that He could love, and that He would be able to fully reflect that love back to Him. In conclusion, the best way to describe God is as our invisible parent, motivated by love to bring forth the universe with us, His children, in the deepest place of His heart. In this segment, we will cover 3 areas. We will continue with our study of the purpose of creation. We are also going to learn about the principle of growth and human responsibility, the responsibility that God gave to us for the fulfillment of His ideal of creation. And thirdly, we will conclude this segment with a study of the human spirit and what God has planned for us after we leave this physical world. Let's begin with the purpose of creation. In the last segment, we learned that even God needs an object if He wants to experience love and the joy that love brings. This is why God created man and woman as His children, and the universe to be the home for His children. How then are we to bring joy to God? In the previous segment, we learned that God gave us 3 blessings: to be fruitful, to multiply, and to have dominion. The first blessing, to be fruitful, means that we are to become a mature person, to be a true son or daughter of God. God intended that each of us act in a way that is true to our conscience. Our conscience is that part of our mind that helps us to see ourselves and others through God's eyes. If we live our life according to our conscience, God will see His character reflected in us, and this will bring God joy. God's Spirit dwells in this kind of person. If we look at the Gospel, John 14:20, this is what Jesus meant when He said that we are to be one with God. A person who has grown to this point would realize their true value in the very core of their being. They would know that they are loved. They would know their identity, that they are a child of God. This is a critical first step. It is a foundation for a successful marriage, career, and for a fulfilling life. The next blessing is to multiply. God wanted man and woman to come together as husband and wife and create a family. It's important to note that this blessing comes after we become a true individual. God intended that man and woman first mature in their hearts as individuals before they come together to experience the romantic and sexual aspect of love. When a true man possessing God's love and a true woman possessing God's love come together in love, this is where the joy gets really exciting. This is where love blossoms, or we could say it's where love explodes like an atom bomb. This is where God can be most fully present. And this place, where man and woman become one, both in heart and in body, is where a new life is conceived, where a child is conceived. And therefore it is where we are able to become parents and truly come to know God's deepest heart as the heavenly parent of all mankind. This is the 4-position foundation we talked about in the previous segment. 4 realms of heart. It is a school of love, and the cornerstone of God's ideal of creation. If the first man and woman had fulfilled this blessing, their family would have been rooted in the love of God. Their children and all their descendants would have inherited this love of God, and we today would all be living as one great family with God. The third blessing God gave is for us to have dominion over all things. God wanted man and woman to be responsible for, take care of and enjoy the creation. Obviously, we did not create the universe or even our own bodies, so we do not automatically have the right to take dominion over things. Originally, it was God's intention that dominion would be based on our becoming His true sons and daughters, fulfilling the first blessing. If we had done so, God would have given His creation to us as a gift, as an inheritance. If we had fulfilled the first blessing, we would view the creation as God does. As God's children, we would have cherished the creation and taken good care of it. Through the creation, we are meant to express our creativity as a means to show our love for each other. Think about it. Even with just a simple 6-string guitar, the number of songs that can be written are endless. When we are able to look at God's creation with love, we will naturally want to take good care of it. True men and women would not act out of greed and selfishness. We would not abuse the creation as we have been doing, polluting and often misusing the natural resources. Problems such as poverty are not because we do not have enough resources, but because we have not learned to value ourselves and one another, and we do not take proper care of our world. There are adequate resources for all to live a very fulfilling and prosperous life. Sadly, our first ancestors did not fulfill the 3 blessings, and many people today live in miserable situations. If we do not change the way we have been conducting our affairs, before long we will destroy God's creation. Now let's move on and talk about the principle of growth and human responsibility. How is it that created things fulfill their purpose? Everything fulfills its purpose of creation by passing through a time period of growth. Even the Bible does not say that God just made things pop into existence. It states that there were 6 days of creation, but these were not 6 24-hour periods. These were each vast periods of geological time. As St. Paul said in 2 Peter 3:8, time for God is different. For God, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like 1 day. We divide the path of growing into 3 stages. We call them the formation stage, the growth stage, and the completion stage. All things come into existence and mature through stages of time. Minerals take time to form. A tree starts out as a seed, then sprouts, finally bears fruit, and a chicken starts out as an egg and grows in time to become a mature chicken. All things have a beginning. They go through a process of growth, and they reach a conclusion. In human life, we go through stages, from our birth and childhood to our youth and on to becoming adults. Now let's ask the question how things grow to fulfill their purpose. The answer is simple. All things fulfill their purpose automatically. They have no choice. They are guided by the principles and forces of nature, the laws of nature. Our physical bodies, which are part of this universe, are the same. You don't decide to grow your hair or make your heart beat or digest your food. You can't take any credit for the functioning of your body because it does not work by your effort. It all happens automatically by the laws of nature. Then why aren't we all fulfilled? It's because we are more than a physical body. We each have a spirit, and in our spirit we each have a heart. The heart and character of a person does not grow the way our physical body grows. It does not grow automatically to perfection. The growth of our heart, our ability to love, is something special. Love is not controlled by any law. True love requires our freedom, our choice. When it is true and connected to God, becomes a basis for God's ideal. When people perfect their love with God, they will experience God's direct minion of love. When that is achieved, no force will ever be able to break our bond of love with God. But when love is still immature, if love is misguided, if it is turned in the wrong direction towards our self-centered desires, it can cause terrible pain and suffering and block our ability to know God, because love has this nature God made special effort to guide the first man and woman concerning love. What kind of guidance did God give to the first man and woman? To understand this, let's go back to the first two blessings. The way God's ideal of creation was to work is that man and woman, as individuals, were to fulfill the first blessing. They were to grow to maturity in heart and character until they resembled God. Only after that were they to fulfill the second blessing, engage in a romantic sexual love, and form a family. To maintain this proper order, God commanded the first man Adam and the first woman Eve not to partake of the sexual romantic love. He guided them to maintain their purity. How long? Not forever, just until they reached maturity. In the Bible it speaks of this commandment that God gave to Adam and Eve, but in symbolic terms. It says that God told Adam and Eve not to eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. We will talk about this again in the next segment. But basically what we will discover is that God was telling the first man and woman to keep their purity, to not engage in a romantic sexual kind of love till they had first matured in the relationship of love with God. Sadly, the first man and woman did not follow God's guidance, and they engaged in romantic love before reaching maturity. Their love, instead of centered on God, was centered on their own selfish desires. This began a pattern which has continued until today. This is the fundamental reason that human society is so far from God's ideal. Let's talk for a moment about our responsibility. You can put this into a formula. God's will, the fulfillment of His ideal, depends on two things: God fulfilling His responsibility and humankind fulfilling ours. If we don't do our part, then the ideal of God cannot be fulfilled. This is why the world isn't good. This is why God's will, God's ideal of creation, is not fulfilled. It is not because of God's failure or anything God did. It is because the first man and woman did not fulfill their responsibility when it came to God's guidance on love. As we mentioned in the introduction, God did not leave us. We chose to leave God. God designed His creation with love at its core. He wanted His children to share in the responsibility for making love work. The tragic reality is that we human beings failed to fulfill our part in the establishment of God's ideal. Let's look at our third and final topic, the human spirit and life after death. Just as God created all things with an internal and an external aspect, the same is true for the universe. There is a physical world, the external universe, and there is a spiritual world, the internal universe. How do we know that a spiritual world exists? If you believe in God, no matter what you call Him, it's easy to have confidence that such a world exists. God, who is eternal beyond time and space, made us to be His objects of love. Therefore God designed the objects of love to be like Him, to be eternal. For this reason we can be confident that there is a spiritual world. You can also know there is a spiritual world based on spiritual experiences. If you have never had a spiritual experience, you may know someone who you trust who has. I know several people who had the experience in which someone they loved appeared to them at the time they passed away. Or, if you study Scripture, both the Bible and the Quran make it clear that there is a spiritual world. Both speak of angels. Angels are spiritual beings similar to people who have a spiritual body but no physical body. Many don't believe in the spirit world because they can't imagine where it is. But now, with the advancement of science, it is easier to understand how two worlds can exist together in the same space. For example, we know in this room there are light waves, there are sound waves, and there are all kinds of other energy waves for TV, for radio, for your cell phones. And these all fill this room. Then how is it possible that all these different kinds of waves of energy can occupy the same space at the same time? This is the nature of energy. Different wavelengths don't bump into each other. So even though every corner of this room is filled with light, the sound of my voice can still be heard. In the same way, the spirit world and physical world both exist without bumping into each other, because they're made of different types of energy. Let's describe these two worlds. The physical world is what we are most familiar with. We each have a physical body and a physical mind. Our body has 5 senses: the ability to see, touch, smell, taste, and hear things in the physical world. Our spirit is similar. We each have a spirit body and a spirit mind. Our spirit body also has 5 senses: the ability to see, touch, smell, taste, and hear in the spirit world. These spiritual senses became dormant after humanity was separated from God. But from time to time, people's spiritual senses are opened, such as when the disciples of Jesus were able to see and hear Moses and Elijah. In the ideal, God intends for people to be the mediators between these two worlds. Our physical body encapsulates all the elements in the physical world, and our spirit body encapsulates all the elements in the spiritual world. And through our bodies, we are meant to have a dominion of love over these two worlds as God's representatives. Probably the most important fact we need to understand from this topic is that your spiritual body and mind are eternal, whereas your physical body and mind are temporary. If you are lucky, your physical body may live 100 years, but one thing is sure: we are all going to die. Our physical life is going to end. This means your spirit and its growth and its health are ultimately your most important responsibility. How then does our spirit grow? Just as our physical body grows by taking in nourishment such as air, sunlight, food, and water, our spirit also grows by being nourished. It receives nourishment from God, God's love and truth. In an ideal world, this love and truth was originally meant to come to us through our parents, who are supposed to be one with God. But love and truth, although essential, are not enough by themselves. We need another element which we call the vitality element. This is where a physical life becomes critical. You can't grow to become a loving, true person unless you put truth and love into practice through your physical activity, through the way you live your life. If we receive inspiration to love others, it won't change who we are unless we actually go out and love other people. Our ability to love, to be a good person, can only develop when we receive this vitality element that comes from putting into practice what we believe in our minds and hearts. By the same token, if we practice a selfish way of life, if we live a life based on false ideas such as, I am valuable only when I have money, position, and when others admire me, our spirit will actually receive unhealthy vitality elements and it will decline. It will become sickly and we will grow more and more distant from God. We can compare our spirit as it grows in our physical life to a baby developing in the womb. The womb is a temporary place, but it is critical if we want to live in this world of air and sunlight. If we don't develop our lungs, our stomachs, or our basic muscles, when we are born into this world, we aren't going to be able to function. Likewise, if we do not take time to receive God's truth and love, and if we don't practice that truth and love in our lifetime, we are going to find ourselves in a very difficult situation when we pass on to the spiritual world. In conclusion, what is the ideal of God's creation? It is a world in which we are able to receive God's love and truth and practice that love and truth in our daily lives. It is a world in which each person is able to freely grow to embody God's heart and character. It is a world where men and women are able to come together to form families of love and to live with others as one great family. This is what religious people have called the kingdom of God. We call it one family under God. Finally, by fulfilling such a life, when we pass on to the next world, the spirit world, we will be able to dwell happily in our eternal home. Thank you for joining us in our study of the principles of life. In the next segment, The Fall, we will explain how humanity lost God's ideal of creation. God bless you.